This is the CitizenLink Report.
If you find our insights helpful, would you support our video efforts? Your gift of $25 or more goes a long ways. Covers the crew, lights, cameras, all that. Just click on Donate. Thanks from all of us. If you've been trying to get a trustworthy answer on what exactly the nuclear option is and what it does and why it matters, well, you have come to the right place. This is the CitizenLink Report. Hi, I'm Stuart Shepard, along with our president, Tom Minnery. Hi, Tom.
Hello, Stuart.
Tom, we've seen a lot about this in the news, but even the best descriptions I've seen approach this in a wonkish fashion and make it a little hard to understand the history of this and also the real impact of it and how significant a change it is. So we're going to talk about that today. First, just help us understand what is the nuclear option.
Well, it refers to the lack of ability to do a filibuster by the minority party in the Senate. The Senate is rife with delaying tactics that allow a few people to stop action when they want to do that. And the nuclear option, so-called, is a nickname for what's called the constitutional option to change the rules of the Senate. It does away with the ability for the minority to require that the majority get not just 51 votes in the 100-member Senate, but 60 votes, a supermajority. They don't have that now because the nuclear option that was exercised.
Now, and that 60-vote margin really comes down to, we all think of filibuster and we think of Mr. Smith goes to Washington or something like that, standing, and Ted Cruz did it earlier this year, where they stand and they give a speech endlessly on the Senate floor. That's been gone for years, and in its place is what's called the cloture vote. That's the wonkish part of this.
Well, the cloture vote is simply the vote to cut off debate and go to a final vote. That did require 60 votes until they got rid of that provision. And yes, filibusters have become sort of gentlemen's agreements where one side says, I'm going to filibuster, and the other side says, okay, we'll go on to other business because we don't have 60 votes. So they don't require people to talk endlessly anymore. And it's gotten a little bit out of hand, but both parties have done it a lot.
And the idea is to move things along more quickly instead of having days of delaying tactics with the speeches on the floor, if you will.
Well, it is, but it erases a characteristic of the Senate. And this takes us back to the founding era. The founders decided that Congress ought to have one body, the House, which is close to the people. In other words, you run for election every 2 years in the House of Representatives, directly elected by the people. The rules are a bit more simple, but they can get arcane too. In the Senate, on the other hand, the idea is that this would be a cooling saucer in an outmoded metaphor. In other words, when your coffee is too hot, you used to pour it in a saucer, apparently, and slurp it out of your saucer to cool it down.
But I'm from the South, so.
I'm glad some traditions have disappeared in this country. Yeah. We don't have that anymore. Well, we don't have that practice anymore. We have the cooling apparatus in the Senate, which slows things down because the founders did not want too much direct democracy. They didn't want the people to have too much direct access to the controls of power, so they wanted to filter that through elected representatives in the House and elected representatives in the Senate, who in turn, in the early years of our republic, were not elected by the people, but the senators were appointed by state legislatures, just to put some distance between hot-headed populism and cool reason. Well, the Senate...
And that's also why the Senate terms are 6 years as opposed to 2, to give them time to work without worrying about the next election coming up.
Right, and so with this change, the Senate has become more like the House. The Republicans have threatened to do it. The Democrats have actually done it.
And the point here is, constitutionally, the way the government is designed to operate is the Senate is supposed to obstruct, to slow things down, to moderate, to force compromise, if you will.
Well, it is. That's the way the system was designed. There hasn't been much compromise because the parties have become polarized lately, and so it's pretty nasty in Washington.
Now, this specifically applies to judicial nominees at the appeals court level, is where the hang-up has been over the last year, the last decade or so. Let's talk about that. Why are the Democrats doing this for appeals court nominees in 2013? What's the big deal here?
Well, it's appeals court nominees to the upper federal court, which is the appeals court, and also to executive appointments. So there'll be some regulators coming out of this heading agencies that those appointments will not be confirmed by the Senate under the old rules, but under this rule, there'll be more regulators confirmed, agency heads. We'll talk about that in a moment. What they're doing, why they're doing it now, is that the president sees, I'm not going to be able to get much through Congress, as the system was designed to obstruct things that the people don't want. Yeah. So he said, I'm going to do what I can through regulatory actions and executive orders, and I need agency heads that I can depend on. So EPA rules will probably go forward, global warming type regulations. He wants to do that. I believe that there are agency appointments that he needs to get through that he's not been able to get through that would help him do that. But the important thing, as you mentioned, and that is the Court of Appeals, the court just below the U.S. Supreme Court, and the most important of the circuit courts of appeal, there's several of them around the country, is the one right in Washington, D.C. Many, many important federal issues go through the Washington, D.C. Court of Appeals, and from that court, many Supreme Court judges have been appointed. And the president has executive orders, as I said, in the realm of environmental regulation and health care. He needs that court to uphold these regulations and those health care executive orders that will be coming. Otherwise, he'll be stymied at the executive order level, since he's already been stymied at the congressional level. Now, some of us think that's a pretty good idea, but this rules change in the Senate allows him to put more liberals on the D.C. Court of Appeals, and that will be we already did that.
So to summarize, you end up with heads of agencies for the administration who are appointed by the president. If you go to court to challenge their outrageous things that they do, you might well end up in an appeals court, which often is the last court that a case is heard, right, where you face a judge appointed by President Obama.
Well, you do. And this is also important for something called IPAB, the Independent Payment Advisory Board. I think that's what that acronym stands for. That is a 15-member body that will supervise payments for such things as Medicare, Medicaid. Is a very integral part of the Obamacare health program. And those appointments to that 15-member board have to be confirmed by the Senate, and the Senate would have filibustered a lot of them. No longer are they able to do that. And so if the president wants to dictate healthcare policy past his tenure in 2016, he's going to have to get that board appointed. Now he can do that more easily.
Now, President Obama had a very different view of this when he was Senator Obama. Here's how he described the American people back then.
And at the end of the day, they expect both parties to work together to get the people's business done. What they don't expect is for one party, be it Republican or Democrat, to change the rules in the middle of the game so that they can make all the decisions while the other party is told to sit down and keep quiet.
So by supporting this change, the president today says, sit down and be quiet.
Yeah, well, the hypocrisy speaks for itself. Now, there's one limiting factor, and that is the Democrats have not applied this to Supreme Court justices, which would need to be confirmed by the Senate. Still, the filibuster rule applies to them. So why they stopped short of that is still a little bit murky. I suspect if the Republicans take over the Senate and are able to have a Republican in the White House and there's a Supreme Court vacancy, they may apply this nuclear option to Supreme Court justice appointments as well.
And the rest of the context here, that video you saw of President Obama speaking, the Democrats under President George W. Bush came up with this idea of filibustering appeals court nominees. The first one successfully done was Miguel Estrada back in the early 2000s. That was pioneered by, it was the idea of minority leader at that time, Harry Reid, and the Democrats who were trying to stymie George Bush's appointments to the federal appeals courts. This is their idea. When it was used against them, they didn't like it, and now everything's changed somehow.
Well, that's right. The shoe is on the other foot, but the pendulum will swing back again, and I believe the Republicans have a good opportunity to take advantage of these rules in the future, although it's going to be a little bit difficult in the near term because there will be a lot of executive appointments and more circuit court and lower federal court nominees sent on through without possibility of the Republicans blocking them. Although, you know what, there are still other delaying tactics in the Senate that I suspect will be used. And I suspect the Republicans will pull every trick out of the hat that they can in order to stop these things. I mean, it is now political war up there because people have been threatening this nuclear option for years. Nobody's done it until now, so the opposition party has to react very vigorously to provide what opposition it can.
And to wrap it up, you point out something that's quite important. This idea of the nuclear option came up during that time when the Democrats in the minority were blocking George W. Bush's nominees, and the Republicans talked about but did not implement the nuclear option. They stopped short of it.
They did indeed. That's the difference, I guess, between Republicans and Democrats.
All right. Tom, thanks for your insights.
You're welcome.
And thank you for watching. We do appreciate hearing from you. You may write to us at mail@citizenlink.com. Send your questions, your comments, your criticisms. We're open to all that. We do read every note that comes in, but we can't always reply to all of them. Have a happy Thanksgiving and a Merry Christmas coming up. And remember, stand tall and be heard.